Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. Today with a special guest, Aya Soma, who's been absent from the live streams for 2 months.
Yeah, it's been a while now.
Yeah. So we're very happy to have her back with us. Advance warning, still a bit jet-lagged, but she's bravely decided to join the evening mug chat. So this is your weekly opportunity to ask any questions whatsoever. As long as they're related to Buddhism, then there's a reasonably good chance that one or both of us will give an answer. So far, I see no questions from online, but it looks like we have a couple from the monastery residents. Delightful. So who wants to go first?
Okay. So I found that I started reading the suttas somewhat recently and to support my practice, and I found that there are some times when I'm very inspired by the suttas that I'm reading, and there are other times where I am extremely conflicted by the suttas that I'm reading, so much so that it can affect my practice, and sometimes I will just decide not to practice. And so I guess I'm wondering if there's any recommendations for some suttas that are maybe more challenging. One I think that comes to mind is in the Majjhima Nikaya about a bhikkhu that was, I think he was spending time with bhikkhunis, and then there was some description about how he needs to like if he saw something happen like violent to a bhikkhuni, that he should just do nothing, and that was my interpretation of it. And I think I was just very, very confused. Do you know the one I'm referring to?
Yes. So, I mean, first off, just generally speaking, if you're having some difficulty with a particular sutta, it's good to discuss it with a monk. So find a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni and discuss whichever sutta you're having trouble with. Because often when we're having difficulty, it's not necessarily that there's a problem with the sutta, but rather it's that we're not quite understanding what the sutta is trying to communicate, and getting some clarification can be helpful. So in that particular case, the point isn't that it's okay to be violent towards bhikkhunis, but rather the Buddha was making a point about the development of metta. That when we develop metta, then even if we see a friend of ours being attacked, then we won't hate the person who's attacking them. We can have compassion even for someone who's attacking one of our friends. This is an example where we might initially have a negative reaction, but on closer examination, we see that actually there's a reasonable point being made. And there are a tiny fraction of suttas which are just weird. And if you discuss them with monks, then they'll actually admit, oh yeah, that one's a little bit weird. Don't worry about that one. But those are a tiny, tiny, tiny minority. 99.9% of the suttas actually make perfect sense, but they don't always make perfect sense on first reading. So in the 0.1% is, for example, the Bakula Sutta. When you come to that one, then you'll be like, oh, that's why this one's considered a bit strange. But almost all of the suttas are actually really top quality material, but they're not always as straightforward as one would hope. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, to add maybe a little bit, that comes to mind is also the instructions that the Buddha gives us to essentially overcome skeptical doubt, which is, I remember when I first read it, I was like, this is so obvious, but so counterintuitive at the same time, which is just simply not to pay attention to things that bring doubt to the mind. It's kind of really simple, right? But it's actually very profound to the extent that, as you've seen, as you actually were sharing, a lot of suttas, on the other hand, have an opposite effect on the mind. But then every now and then, perhaps you encounter one that doesn't really make much sense. And then what do we choose to do? We just choose essentially to dwell on it and cultivate doubt. So there are things that, yes, of course, as Bhante said, we can ask questions, but sometimes even if we ask questions, we don't quite get it. I remember I had a lot of problems at the very beginning with the lion's roar. Essentially, when the Buddha is basically, pretty much listing how wonderful he is. And I remember having a really strong reaction of perceiving the Buddha as someone really arrogant. And I was like, I think I'm done with this Buddhism. Like, what kind of spiritual, because I had all these ideas of how, spiritual practitioner was supposed to be. And even though I asked questions, right in that moment, I was not ready to fully understand, I guess. Like, my mind didn't have the karmic conditions to quite get it. So yeah, I was pretty much deciding to still hold that kind of thought, contemplation in my mind. So I was very close to actually just leaving all the Dhamma for one of the least controversial suttas possibly ever there, right? But then, I decided actually to make a different thing, which was to put that sutta on the shelf and get back to it later. And in that way, that's basically, I think, what the Buddha is suggesting in terms of just don't focus, don't dwell too much on things that create skeptical doubt.
Joe, you have a question?
Yes, so I think I'm finally going to be able to leave tomorrow. And before I go, I was just wondering, what is skillful, Venerable Sir? What is unskillful? What is blameworthy? What is blameless? What should be cultivated? What should not be cultivated? What having been done by me will be for my long-term harm and suffering? Or what having been done by me will be for my long-term welfare and happiness?
I think this is a great question for Ayasoma.
Maybe not jet lagged.
Briefly speaking, follow the Noble Eightfold Path. So this is the outline of what we do. So just keep digging into the Eightfold Path. Like, pick up each one, examine it closely, consider how you can improve that aspect within your life, and then move on to the next one. And you can do this from now until the moment you attain full awakening. This is Buddhism. Buddhism is the ever-deepening relationship with the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay? That's a short answer to your question. Okay, we have a few questions online, it looks like. Do you want to pick a question?
Well, first of all, thank you, Elaine, for your lovely wishes. Hello to Denise, Shadow Label, Kevin. Ciao, Kevin. And Shadow Label is asking a question that I don't think is very much related to Buddhism, so maybe not, right?
Yeah, not really.
And Denise is saying, will there be any residential retreats held at Empty Cloud in 2023? I think so, since we are getting actually a lot of questions asking for that. So unless there's something kind of really crazy happening, I think in the next couple of weeks we'll decide the details, and we will communicate them. So we look forward to seeing you soon. And Shadow Label says, when fasting in general, how do monks do it? Every day. We do what is called these days intermittent fasting.
Intermittent.
I was in Italy for 2 months, so now my English has declined. Intermittent fasting. So yeah, we don't eat really after afternoon. And Manal says, Venerables, so good to share the same space with you. Oh, likewise. I've asked a question in the past about one's ability to recall past lives. Though I do not have this particular ability, I'm investigating it. Would you have insight into how important recollection of past lives has with eradicating level of ignorance surrounding rebirth? This seems to be a critical Dhamma lesson.
Well, I think having a general intellectual understanding of karma and rebirth is necessary. It's actually one element of right view, is having a general understanding of karma and rebirth. One doesn't need to have a detailed and specific understanding, but just a general idea of how the decisions that we make then create corresponding conditions in our future experiences. And that this also includes experiencing different modes of being, different kinds of lives. So human lives as well as non-human lives. So having a general intellectual understanding is definitely important. As far as having a direct experiential understanding through the cultivation of the supernatural ability to recall past lives or to see how other beings die and are reborn, doesn't seem to be critically necessary in order to attain at least the early stages of awakening. There's some debate as to whether this is a standard quality of fully awakened beings, but it doesn't seem to be necessary in order to attain at least the first 3 stages of awakening. So I wouldn't put too much importance into deliberately developing that particular ability. There's also a very interesting sutta where the Buddha mentions that even someone who can remember past lives can still have wrong view related to karma and rebirth. So he gives the example of someone who can remember their past life, and they remember, well, in their past life, they were a really terrible person. They were a murderer, they were a rapist, they were a brigand, they had done all kinds of really awful things. But then in this life, they're healthy, they're well off, they're well respected. And so this person actually has the ability to remember their past life. And they come to the conclusion that therefore karma is nonsense. And it doesn't matter what choices we make. And the Buddha says that the problem here is that if you're only looking back 1 or 2 past lives, then you're not getting a complete enough picture. So if the person had looked back farther, then they might have seen maybe the life before that, they had done a lot of good deeds. And that now they're getting the experiences of what they had done 2 or 3 lifetimes ago. And that the awful things they did in their previous life are still waiting to express their consequence in maybe the next life around or the life after that. So even if one develops a limited ability of past life recall, that doesn't necessarily guarantee wisdom. It can actually be a basis for even deeper delusion and misunderstanding. So I don't think it's critical in order to develop, I don't think it's critical if one wants to attain awakening. I don't think it's critical to develop the ability to remember past lives, at least not in the first 3 stages.
Thank you, Bante. And Elaine says, if the Buddha says there is no self, using the example that we have no mastery over our bodies, feelings, etc., can one conclude that the Buddha indeed had a self since he appeared to have mastery over many of these factors? Well, actually, the Buddha also got sick. The Buddha also died, actually, out of whatever he ate. So, no, actually, breaking news. Also, the Buddha was, even though he was a perfectly awakened being, was subject to old age, sickness, and ultimately death. So, no, it's not something, the body didn't belong to the Buddha, just like it doesn't belong to us. The Buddha had mastery over the mind, had mastery over knowledge, had mastery over understanding that all of these things, all the aggregates didn't belong to him, essentially. So this is what we're trying to essentially understand for ourselves as well. And this is what anatta essentially is. It doesn't mean that we don't exist. We're not denying, essentially, that there is a self, but we're essentially understanding that this, what we call self, is dependently arisen. And so it's not that one thing exists or doesn't exist. As we chant every morning here with the Kachanagotta Sutta, the Buddha invites us to, really contemplate this, how we're constantly thinking in this binary way. This either exists or it doesn't exist. We can't understand in any other way. But the Buddha teaches the Dhamma by the middle. So when this comes into being, this arises with the cessation of this ceases, right? So like there's, when there are causes and conditions, then there is something that is appearing. And then when these conditions aren't there, then this disappears. And that's very important. That's what we contemplate constantly through meditation practice. We really see these three characteristics all the time. And then it stops becoming this sort of, philosophical concept, this really weird thing that we say to, oh, there is no self, kind of thing. And non-Buddhist people are like, okay, sure. Right? And then perhaps they ask us a few questions and then we're like, I don't know. Yeah, maybe there is a self. I don't know. Right? We don't quite get it because it's something that we read in a book. We're not really having a true understanding of also what are the attas, what are the selves that we we constantly grasp on, that we constantly think are who we are. So we're like, yeah, there is no self, yeah, there's no gender, yeah, there is no nationality, there is no this and there's no that, but actually we have a big stockpile of all of that. Right? So it can be, we're very attached to all of these different things. So we're not trying to bypass our sense of identification or the sense of identification of others, but rather truly understand where are they coming from, what are they made of. And then when we see for them for what they are, then it's easy to let them go, let them fall away.
Yeah, I mean, as Zen Master Dogen said, he said to study Buddhism is to study the self. To study the self is to know the self. To know the self is to let go of the self. And to let go of the self is to be awakened by all things. So the point is that we first have to have a direct understanding of what our self-identity is, an understanding of what we think our self is. And then we have the ability to let go of it, to attain awakening.
Thank you, Bhante. And Jay says, does Theravada have a concept of life or vital energy like chi, ki, prana in Mahayana or Tibetan Buddhism, or is it a concept borrowed from Taoism and Hinduism?
There's a tiny handful of places in the suttas where something seems to be kind of hinting at something like this, but it's not. I mean, you kind of have to read between the lines, and it's not gone into in any detail. It's just kind of vaguely mentioned that there is something that keeps these bodies alive, but there's no detail like you find in the other traditions. So yeah, I would say that it's predominantly something that comes from Taoism and from certain branches of Hinduism.
Great, thank you, Bhante. And good to see you, Niramon. Hello, Geeta, Mary. It was good to see you also in person earlier. And Bhumika, Pintu, Jayanta. Manal has a question from a friend. As a householder, how can one practice renunciation? For example, is it okay to take the salary your employer gives without expecting more in the future?
Well, I mean, briefly speaking, there's lots of ways to practice renunciation as a householder. I mean, the greatest renunciation is letting go of our self-identities. But just in more simple terms, just looking at your desires and practicing contentment. So rather than constantly chasing what you want, practice contentment with what you already have. So that's one way of practicing renunciation as a householder. So the example you give of accepting the salary that you get from your employer and without expecting more, that's a very simple example. It's like, well, okay, however much money you're making, it's like, well, as long as I can survive, it's good enough. That would be one example of practicing renunciation. Yeah, I mean, just generally speaking, look at your desires and attachments and work on letting go of those desires and attachments. This is how you practice renunciation, whether you're a layperson or a monastic.
Right.
Okay, and Dan says, regarding anatta, Ajahn Brahm suggests the question, what do I take myself to be, rather than who am I? Yeah, that's quite wise. So if we ask who am I or what am I, then that's already assuming that there's something we are. But asking what do I take myself to be or what do I assume I am, that's actually a bit wiser of a kind of question. Because it's recognizing that our self-identity is actually an assumption, not necessarily something real. It's just a concept. And so last question so far. Any other questions from in person? Cameron, go ahead.
So if one loses a very cherished friend, teacher, and is dealing with like the grief of the loss, that's very like a very sticky, kind of persistent, ongoing grief in that process. Do you have any sorts of thoughts about dealing with the grief, but also figuring out how to like continue practice when you practiced in a supportive way in one way, and then that way is no longer existent?
Yeah, I've been thinking actually quite a bit about the death of loved ones in general, actually, aside from this particular relationship that you described with the Dhamma teacher. But in a way, actually, loved ones, I feel like, are Dhamma teachers in many different ways, if we allow them to be anyway. Even our monastic cat, monastery cat Stan, died a few months ago, and he was an incredible Dhamma teacher. And so we tend to focus a lot on the absence of, someone physical, and on perhaps the conversations that we've had, and there seems to be like this kind of nothingness that is left. But in reality, there is so much that is so alive and well, which is actually right here, like right here. All the mind states, all the different practices that we do, especially if we have a relationship with a Dhamma teacher. We actually recently had a monastic that has spent a lot of time with Ajahn Pasanno, who's still alive, luckily. But when he was here, Tanjagara actually, and he gave a Dhamma talk, I remember the first thing that my mind thought, like the thought that appeared in my mind was like, oh, he has so many traits of Ajahn Pasanno. And it's very much connected to what I'm trying to say, in the sense that we are constantly absorbing, things from others. There's this like beautiful exchange. So So when we think about parents having children, we tend to think about it in this kind of like biological sort of way, where, okay, that's the child of that person. But really, actually, that's the child of that person in terms of so many other things that are not really necessarily bodily components. In the way that they're constantly contributing. Like, I am the child of my parents. It was very interesting spending these weeks with my parents now and seeing that in terms of Dhamma, of like all the things that I have absorbed, and also all the things that I have absorbed from other parents, like Pante Sudazo being a parent, Ajahn Stan, the cat, being my parent, all the monastics that have been parents. Now I'm absorbing things from you all. You're all being my parents. So there's always all of these, different things that we have acquired and that we have grown, and they're really beautiful. Really, they're really to be nourished, really to be respected. That's the true inheritance that we have constantly, whether people are quote unquote alive or quote unquote dead. So it's this constant, rebirth actually of mind states, rather than and this kind of death. So bringing to mind all of these things and honoring what we've learned, honoring what we have developed, honoring those practices, I feel like it's a really beautiful way, especially if we've had such a beautiful Dharma sort of formal connection with someone, to bring it to mind and use it as fuel for practice, and trying to also share that inheritance. This is also what is so beautiful, if you just inherit a water bottle, from someone, and you only have a water bottle and it can only serve you, like the purpose of, maybe you can share it with 2 other people. But when it's something that you have learned that is, something that is not really material, then actually it can be multiplied. You can do all the miracles. You can be Jesus and multiply, exponentially, and share it with so many people. So this is what kind of comes to mind.
And Amaranta says, I started reading the Indriya Samyutta as you recommended. Do you have any suggestion to help me understand better? Well, I think maybe if you can quote specific passages or suttas that you're having a hard time understanding, then we can help you deal with those. Otherwise, again, I gave a talk recently on the Indriyas, so I think that covered the basics. But if you have specific questions, we can take specific questions. And Joe, you have a question?
Yes, I was thinking of reading about the term patidana, sharing merit. And I was been contemplating that in relationship to mindfulness of death, where the Buddha says we should be mindful of death from the time it takes us to in and out and breath in terms of heedfulness. So I was curious what you would consider the most meritorious thing one can do in the time it takes to breathe in, and the easiest way to share with the most people in the time it takes to breathe out.
Actually, it's the practice of metta.
Yeah.
That's one of the most direct. So if you want to incorporate it with breathing, so as you breathe in, you build up your metta, the metta in your mind. As you breathe out, you dedicate that merit to all your loved ones. So then with each breath in and each breath out, you're cultivating a wholesome mind state and spreading the merit. That's one way that comes immediately to mind. Yeah. And I think you're already pretty proficient in metta practice, so that one shouldn't be too challenging for you.
You can always, by effort, you can always make it. How do we make more metta for
Yeah.
more people?
Yeah, you can just keep magnifying it.
Yeah.
So just every moment you make it a bit stronger, a bit brighter, a bit warmer. You can keep building it up. Yeah. Okay, any other questions?
It's your last opportunity for 2022.
Oh, that's true. Final monk chat of 2022.
Yeah. So you better seize the opportunity.
Maybe they're hoping for 2023. Oh, go ahead.
I I saw a dead squirrel today in the park, and I wasn't actually familiar with what to do in a situation like that, being practicing as a Buddhist. So Cameron were very kind enough to show me that there are funeral chants, and I did a little chanting. Is that effective enough, or is there other things we can do if we find, like, how should we respond to death when we see it in nature as a way to what's good for our practice?
Yeah, I mean, funeral chanting is always a good idea. Definitely, that's a good recollection. Sharing the merits. It's a good way to approach that. I don't know, whatever is inspiring to you in that moment.
I think just to clarify what my intention was, is that, as I understand it, is this right view that no one actually dies, they've just been reborn. So the squirrel has just gone to another life, and the only people who actually really died or are off are the arahat, or enlightened beings.
Well, in Laos, our friend Cam was telling us that he's originally from Laos, and he was telling us how in his language, Laos is a very Buddhist country, obviously, so the language is very, very Buddhist too. So essentially, whenever someone is born, they call that like the sad house, and whenever they're going to a funeral, they go, "Hey, we're going to the happy house." So there is something to that, to reflect. So of how we normally get really excited about birth and really depressed about death, but actually we're really trying to end this, rebirth thing. So the whole rebirth is not really a joyful experience when we're thinking about it, because you buy one birth, get one death free. Comes with old age and sickness. So it's a bit of a tragic affair.
Buy one, get three free.
Yeah, buy one, get three free. Big bargain, but I don't know if it's a good deal, really. Like a lot of fake advertising.
Actually, that is totally true.
Yeah, right?
Fake advertising. We're like, birth, it's so great. Don't read the fine print.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's true. But on the other hand, I mean, it's also, while we're in this predicament, I feel like if we get too much into thinking, then it just becomes an intellectual, artificial thing. And honestly, to see a sentient being that is dead, whether they're human or non-human, it has a big impact on the heart, and it can be quite painful, or it can be quite gross. It can be like everything in between and even more. So I would, whenever I have that experience, I just really look at that experience, both outside of myself and inside myself. So both emotionally, the experience, also recollecting that I'm no different. That, for example, if I'm appalled by a body, really bringing up the reflection of, I am subject to precisely those same conditions. Why am I repelled by that? And if I'm extremely sad, to really contemplate what is this emotion? What is this experience? What, really be there and have a great way also to do contemplation of death without it being abstract. Sometimes, if we are on the cushion and we're like, okay, now it's time to do my contemplation of death and I'm subject to die. Yeah, sure. Everything will be separate from me, but right now it's with me. Like we can't. Do you see what I mean? But actually, if we're seeing a sentient being in front of us. You know, when the monastery cat died and there was rigor mortis and all of that in front of, that was really potent. You know, he was not euthanized. So we actually saw him die. It was brutal. 24 hours of seeing the excruciating pain of a sentient being, and all of us monastics spending a lot of time with Stan there. It was heartbreaking. It was awful and beautiful at the same time. That was one of the most incredible teachings that Stan the cat has given us. I was in pieces. It was really difficult before, during, and after. And that was some serious contemplation of death. I was like, I have now contemplated death for real. Like, not in the way that I've, contemplated it so far. Because even my grandparents, when they died, I actually saw them only after they were dead, not through the whole process. And it's really, really, really powerful also to see the dignity even of a sentient being, like our cat friend. So beautiful how he dealt with pain, how he was external, how he trusted us in his last moments. It was such a really great learning experience. Not in an abstract way, but in a very potent, way. So whenever we're experiencing death, we're experiencing death really all the time. Now it's winter, so all the trees, all the nature is really like all dead or half dead. So another question is, why are we relating to, the trees in a more equanimous way? Maybe even can be also beautiful. And why are we relating to the squirrel in a different way? And why are we relating to a cat friend in a different way? And why are we relating to our relatives in a different way? And why are we relating to our own body in a different way? Like there's so many differences. So we see also there what is closer to our atta, right? What we think we are, and what is more distant. And that, creates all of these conditions, this pulling and this trying to, be averse, like pulling and pushing, essentially. So really contemplating that experientially, I think it's very powerful.
Okay. And Lely says, if we trained our mind to live and work as part of the phenomena and less thought of we as the person behind the action, are these the practice of anatta? And that's a part of it. So that's so recognizing that this body-mind is a part of nature. This body is the product of nature. This mind is the product of causes and conditions. Then that helps us to stop taking things personally. So recognizing, for example, that much of the beliefs and opinions that we have are not actually our own. They're just things that we hear from other people, or that we see in mass media, or that we've been taught by our parents and or that we learned in school, or like a lot of what we think are my opinions and my ideas. Well, actually, they're not. They're things that we learned from other people or from outside sources. And this body, again, we think, well, this is my body. It's who I am. Well, actually, what is this body made up of? One of the reflections the Buddha says to consider is that this body is built up out of rice and porridge. So what is this body really? Actually, I think about it sometimes. I'm like, this body is made up of, well, here in America, bread and peanut butter, I guess.
Mine is made of pasta.
Touche. But actually seriously reflecting on this. So like earlier today, I was drinking a glass of orange juice. So this body is built up of orange juice. So earlier there was a very clear sense that that orange juice is not me. It's something outside of me. It's a product of nature. But now that orange juice has been fully integrated into this body, and now there's this idea that it's me. And then in a little while, I'm going to go to the restroom and I'm going to excrete it from my body. And then there'll be the sense that it's not me again. So, but actually all along, it's still just part of nature. It's still not me through the whole process. So what we call this body here, it's, as the Buddha said, it's just built up out of rice and porridge. It's just built up out of bread and pasta and salad and orange juice and whatever else. Like this body, it's just plants and animals and air and water, and it's just natural elements shifting through an arbitrarily defined zone. So we just arbitrarily section off a little piece of nature and call it me. It's really weird. Kind of like you go in the forest and you're like, this patch of ground is me. It's like, it just makes zero sense. But we're so used to doing this all the time with this chunk of meat that we don't even think about it. It's like, this chunk of meat is me. The rest of those meat chunks are not me. And we're all on some dirt that's also not me, until I put some of the dirt in the meat chunk and then it becomes me. Like, it's just so weird, but we take it so seriously. So this is one way of practicing anatta, which, again, it can be quite potent. Actually, just the act of eating, drinking, urinating, and defecating. These are practices of anatta sanya, if you use them in that way, because it's a very deep reflection on what this body is. And similarly, as I was saying earlier about beliefs and opinions and ideas and concepts and all of that, well, recognizing that that's actually not any different. We ingest things, we ingest ideas and concepts from the outside world, and then we expel ideas and concepts. It's actually basically the same as eating and defecating. It's exactly the same process. So this is the reflection on what the Buddha called the four nutriments. So how we ingest things and expel things, and we arbitrarily call those things me when they're at one particular stage in their movement. But actually all along, it's just an aspect of nature. So reflecting on the act of eating and voiding can be a very interesting way to practice anatta sanya.
Great, thank you, Bante. And Manal asks, won't wait till 2023 for this question. Sadhu. Would you help me understand what is merit? And if one earns merit of their accord, then how can it be offered or shared with others so easily? That's a very good question. So what comes to mind is, well, how I relate to merit rather than give you a textbook answer. I always think of merit, of meritorious deeds, as essentially fuel for the car that leads to awakening. So essentially, yeah, you want to fill up the tank. Otherwise, if you run out, you're probably going to get stuck, and yeah, it's going to be a little bit difficult to find. Yeah. Or maybe we'll just have to walk and it will take like a very, 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 very long time.
And you might get hit by a car.
Yeah, yeah. And then, the rebirth and getting very stuck. So yeah, this fuel is one way that I think of it. And also this way of, once again, beautifying the mind, this ornament of mind. There's so many beautiful things that human beings are constantly doing without getting into necessarily the merit per se. But like you go to Italy, actually, like in the Amalfi Coast, for example. It's one of the places where people all over the world go to, and where my mom comes from. We were there in the spring, actually, with some monastic friends, and it was interesting because I hadn't been there in so long, and so my memory was still a little bit stuck to like 10 to 15 years ago. And now things have changed in terms of, like, for example, they grow all these lemon trees there, and it's now only very, very old people that are left growing these lemon trees that are really beautiful. They create all this incredible landscape, and all the ceramics, all the artisan work that is done in that area makes that area so special, so beautiful. But it's actually dying out. It's because nobody wants to really grow lemons, because then you have to actually not only grow them, grow the land, like work on the land, do all of the sort of stuff that requires a lot of physical work, just to keep up the the whole lemon tree farm extravaganza. But then, because it's on a mountain, then you also have to go up and down with all these like lemons, and it's really hard work, which back in the day, people didn't have that many options for work, and they were also a lot more physically fit, so they would do it. But now only 18, 90-year-old people can do it. Paradoxically, they're stronger than the 20 something. So it's dying out. And with it, also the beauty of the area is actually slowly dying out. Now it's still pretty, but you can see how anicca essentially is taking over, and it's becoming slowly but surely more anonymous. Maybe not in the next 10 years, but definitely in 20, 30, 40, who knows, right? Because of all of this beauty that is disappearing, because it's not being offered anymore. So I guess what I'm trying to say, and I'm a little bit jet lagged, is that whenever we make also acts of merits, we're making all these good deeds that not only, kind of like the lemon, not only feed the one person who is growing the lemon, selling the lemon, and eating the lemon, but actually it, beautifies, an entire region. It helps also neighbors, and the neighbors of the neighbors, and the neighboring towns, and the whole country all together. That's what even makes Italy such a beautiful place to go to. Like, there's all these different equivalents to all the the lemon trees, all these different beautiful activities that maybe it's just individuals doing that, but all these individuals all together, they're all like sharing and creating so much wealth, which is cultural wealth, beautiful wealth. It's not, you can't really monetize it, really. But even like the big hotels, they actually are so beautiful, and they are so sought because of all of these different realities. They don't pay the lemon tree farmer, they don't pay the artisan, they don't pay, all of this human activity that happens in the area, but they definitely cash in a lot. So I feel like that's kind of the same whenever we are making acts of merit. There's also a lot of other people that are cashing in on our merit. Because we are really beautifying the world. We're beautifying our mind, and we're beautifying everything that surrounds us. So we see it also here in West Orange, which is the place where Empty Cloud Monastery is. The majority of the people that live around here don't really come to the monastery. They go to their local church, their local synagogue, their local other temple, non-Buddhist temple. But they're so happy that we're here. Everybody always greets us. Everybody's so happy, and they're always saying that it's so much nicer, being here now that the temple has opened up. So it's quite incredible how we are somewhat sharing the merit, not only us monastics, but everybody who is coming here. Remember, some of the friends, lay friends, actually started planting all these beautiful flowers here. And then some neighbors were like, wow, the flowers are great. Oh, they're remarkable, incredible. So that's also another, sharing of the merits. So we can think it in that way. Sometimes we do it intentionally. So like the people who planted the flowers, they intentionally shared the merit with the Buddha and with us, essentially. The Buddha statue, the people, like the actual people, that the Buddhists, let's say, that was their intentional dedication. But then actually they also shared it, perhaps unintentionally, with the whole other neighbors, with the whole town of West Orange, or whoever stopped by or came by. So this is what we're constantly doing whenever we are putting fuel in our car. It's that fuel that doesn't actually pollute. Some really great green energy, very sustainable. Actually creates even more fuel, more energy. So it's a win-win for everyone.
Great, that's lovely. And any other questions? You have a question?
Yeah, I was really taken by what you said about the food. I thought about we are what we eat. Have you ever contemplated? You've been in robes now for so long that you're made of Dhamma.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. This body is built up with the generosity of others. Yeah. Partly yours. Yeah. Yeah, I've got a few particles of Joe merit in this body.
My relatives benefit from that.
Yeah. So actually, you can think about that. So when you leave the monastery tomorrow, you can think that you're leaving behind bits of merit in our bodies.
Yeah, that's actually what makes, for example, an experience like Tudong, what we were doing, which is it's like some really intense, practice. Where it can be really uncomfortable, really difficult to the mind. And actually, that was the biggest beautiful form of nutriment, aside from the actual nutrient that people gave us in terms of, just food that we were really needing because we were walking so much, and physically we needed to eat a lot. But it was also because it was given in that pure, beautiful way. That was the biggest nutriment, actually. I feel like in the Tudong, like recollecting the generosity as it was being given and afterwards. And it was just like this other beautiful fuel of that would help you actually overcome also all the difficulties along the way, and also stop complaining too much, at least for myself. I like to complain a lot. It's cold. My legs hurt. Like I'm hungry, Sorry about that. He had to endure me. All of the different Tudongs, because it's very, very challenging. It's meant to be that way. And that's a really beautiful way of just going like, it's really not that cold. It's really not that that difficult. It's really like okay, and how wonderful to be the recipient of such incredible generosity, and to just actually pretty much mostly see the most beautiful side of humanity. It's basically the opposite of like reading any newspaper. In the newspaper, usually it's like a tragedy, how human beings are like, behaving in the worst possible way worldwide. And you can get really depressed. They're like, oh, they're polluting everything and killing everyone and discriminating on every single sentient being. You're like, wow, it's really awful, this samsara. When you're a monastic, most of the time it's like, wow, people are really incredibly generous and kind and hospitable. Wow, what beautiful sentient beings.
The headline is like, lady brings coffee and sandwiches to Buddhist monks. It's just like, okay, and that's actually a really delightful headline.
without even knowing they're Buddhist monks.
Yeah, like
or knowing what Buddhism is.
sees random bald weirdos in robes and gets them coffee and sandwiches. It's just like one touching experience after another.
Yeah. Yeah, like actually we did our Tudong in Sicily. How appropriate, Usually whenever we read about Sicily on the news, it's so tragic. Like it's literally like the worst things that happen in Sicily. How much did we experience of what is said in the news in Sicily? Zero.
In fact, it was an incredibly beautiful experience
Yeah.
of just all the good things about human nature.
We even met the nicest politician ever. Like literally, it was crazy. We went to this town. We showed up. We smelled because we hadn't like taken a shower in like 4 days, and yeah, like we looked pretty awful, underslept, and they just we met with the mayor of the town, and the mayor was asking us about the precepts, and everybody, in Sicily, whenever we shared our precepts, they were like, oh, amazing, amazing, incredible, incredible, like very enthusiastic about, really anumodana about the vows of renunciation. And the politician then decided to call his friend, who was a restaurant owner, and to offer us lunch the following day, getting the restaurant owner to open 2 hours ahead of time in order to cook the meal for these weird smelly people.
These dirty homeless people who just wandered through town.
Yeah. And it's remarkable. You should all go to San Fratello. Like San Fratello in Sicily is
Which
the town.
also means holy brother.
Yeah.
So the name of the town is Holy Brother.
Yeah.
And it was really beautiful. There was that feeling of spiritual family just walking into that town.
So yeah, there you go, There's so many different ways to experience reality. And that was actually a really big teaching in that sense. I was like, wow, actually even politicians can be really nice,
Yeah.
really wholesome, really do good things.
So that seems to be the end of the questions. So if there's nothing else, then we could go ahead and wrap up for the evening. Yeah.
Maybe we can give a little blessing for the end of 2022.
Okay. Sure.
That's good.
So a blessing for everyone who's participated in all these monk chats over 2022. May you join in for another 52 monk chats in 2023. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba buddhanubhavena sada sunni bhavantu te bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba dhammanubhavena sada sunni bhavantu te bhavatu sabba mangalang rakantu sabba devata sabba sanghanu bhavena sada soti bhavantu te.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Great, and we'll see you all next year.
May you have a happy and joyful 2023 full of Dhamma.